Welcome back to the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. Artificial intelligence is making its way into nearly every profession. It can help gain insights in enormous, complex data sets. It can summarize technical writing reports and give you a bullet point list of takeaways. Artificial intelligence is a powerful, sharp tool, but it does cut both ways. As much as it can aid us in our work, it brings with it a number of risks, like hallucinations, data security concerns, and job loss. So, how can we take the best of what AI has to offer and avoid the worst of its pitfalls? The journalism profession is grappling with those very questions today. More than ever, the question of how news organizations will use artificial intelligence seems like an existential one.
It does, Tia. Professional journalists, broadcasters, media companies, and distribution platforms who make up the news media are facing a reality where local newsrooms continue to shrink and disappear, all while AI is occupying every nook and cranny of our digital white-collar workday and asking us, can I make that easier for you? How existential is that question? Is it adapt or die for local news in the face of AI? Liam Andrew joins us now to help answer those questions. He's the technology lead at the American Journalism Project's product and AI studio. And we should note OpenAI, the company that owns and developed ChatGPT, is a financial supporter of the American Journalism Project. Liam Andrew, thank you for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So I've mostly heard of ChatGPT when it comes to AI, but I imagine the generative AI writing tools aren't all that's in the toolkit for journalists and newsrooms. What kinds of artificial intelligence tools are we talking about? What can these tools do besides, let's say, write a paragraph with good grammar and a hallucination or two thrown in?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you covered a couple of them in the introduction. I certainly think that a big one is all of the vast amounts of data that are out there, public data sets from federal filings to big public meetings that journalists just don't have time to get to. They can't be at every meeting all the time, so how can AI help them with transcription and summarization and determining some of the patterns that our public officials are talking about or that people are interested in? So a lot of what I'm excited about in this space is around summarization of that big data.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many stories within the data. I can say that as working as an investigative journalist, we were mining these data sets and that could take days or weeks. And often what you would find are major disparities, major discrepancies. And then it was about trying to really find that narrative from the data. But in order to get that far, in order to see that disparity between, let's say, racial and ethnic groups when we're talking about things having to do with medicine, for example, or real estate, just to get to that point, though, takes so much time. So this is where you see it there being a really big bright spot. Now, you work with newsrooms around the country on adopting artificial intelligence in local news. We're going to get into the risks in a little bit, but let's stay on the good news. What are you hearing from reporters, editors, news directors, folks on the ground? I know our newsroom often uses Otter, and that can create transcriptions out of audio recordings, and it saves us a lot of time if we're looking for, let's say, a particular quote from like an hour-long piece of tape. So what tools are people using?
Yes, a lot of people are using Otter. That's become a pretty standard default in most newsrooms that we're working with. And that's been really fun to see how much they've adopted this transcription service very quickly. Another example of a tool that a lot of newsrooms are finding value in is a tool called Pinpoint that's built by Google. And Pinpoint takes unstructured documents like PDFs, like big federal filings or 990 forms or things that used to take months and months to sift through if you wanted to look through 30,000 of them and find a big pattern or find an outlier that you knew could lead to a story. Now, Pinpoint, you can upload all those PDFs or those documents to Google, and usually it's public documents, so reporters are a little less concerned about the security there. And they can start asking questions about the data and learning a little bit more about what's in there. So those are two really good examples, and I think there's others that we're seeing and that some of these newsrooms are building. One example that I love to see is from Civic News Company, and they are building a transcription service for school board meetings specifically, so that uses not just Otter or doesn't just transcribe it, but it helps to find newsworthy moments and detect where a moment that a journalist is really interested in that's aligned with their beat might want to dig in a little deeper. And they've already had some stories published based on data that they wouldn't have gotten because they just didn't have enough reporters to be at these school board meetings.
Liam, I am a former reporter for Civic News Company for Chalkbeat Detroit. And let me just say that some of those school board meetings would go on and on and on, and we're talking 4+ hours, and I would record the entire meeting and I would run it through Otter, and to find those moments, those newsworthy moments, I was also in real time during the meeting taking lots of notes and then consulting with my phone to see what time this particular thing was said or that was said. So this is sounding really good to me.
So there's so much promise there.
Yeah. So what about ChatGPT and other generative AI models that write so well? Do you hear reporters using those? I mean, there's definitely some ethical concerns there.
Sure. Certainly there are some that have talked about it. I don't think most journalists, of course, are natural skeptics, and that's a really good thing in this case. They're concerned about the security of what ChatGPT is training on. Is it training on their input? Are they giving it some of their scoops, for instance? And then there's certainly worries about just that craft of writing and making sure that you don't end up sounding like a robot when you're talking. So I think the place where I see some more generative some tools like ChatGPT being used for end-user facing work is in writing headlines and social media copy and some of the more marketing aspects of the journalism profession. And that's a place where I encourage our journalists to try it. And usually it ends up being more of a back and forth that it can be an assistant to you rather than a replacement for you. And that's the way I like to frame it, rather than having it just write the headline for you, say, suggest 10 headlines for me. And then you can sometimes pick apart, one out of the 10 might be pretty good, or have elements of it that give you an idea for how to craft that headline that you might not have had.
And we should stay on that for a moment, the importance of writing an accurate headline that properly communicates to people what a story is about. I mean, it's the thing that we're sometimes doing at the very end after we have labored over a story for, days, maybe even weeks. And that is unfortunate because there are a lot of people who are just going to read a headline and they're going to take what they read in that headline and take it as the news itself without going into that story and gaining some additional knowledge or context. And that can be really problematic. So there's that much more of a reason for us to really get those headlines right for people, and the AI generators can certainly help get the wheels cranking in that way. Now, here at WDET, like many of the nonprofit newsrooms you work with, we put a high value on engagement with the public above all else. Oftentimes, the most impactful connections that we make with the community, they happen during the news gathering and production process. Daily things like writing follow-up emails, catching up on our guest log, or digging deeper on background with a source. Do you think AI frees up time for more deep connections, or do we lose something crucial to engagement if journalists spend less time on each task they're doing?
I certainly hope that the journalists are taking some of the time that might be saved from using AI as an initial research assistant, or as a transcriber, for instance, of these big, long city hall meetings, and using that instead to engage with the public. I think AI can't replace that, and as long as we are continuing to have the dialogue back and forth between the press and the public, I think that's something we're going to have to keep doing no matter what.
You're listening to The Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent.
And I'm Tia Graham. Our guest is Liam Andrew, the technology lead at the American Journalism Project's Product and AI Studio, where he advises nonprofit newsrooms on adopting artificial intelligence into their work. We also want to hear from you. Will artificial intelligence save local newsrooms, or will they be their downfall? The number is 313-577-1019. Local newsrooms are struggling right now. That's known. Newsrooms are shrinking or going away entirely. And the term news deserts is happening local news across the country and taking up more space on the map. Every year we'll see those deserts. We're seeing those deserts pop up. So many unions and professional organizations are raising alarms about job loss from AI. Is there a risk of AI making it easier to downsize newsrooms, essentially putting more responsibility on fewer journalists?
I think it's a risk that has already been, you're already seeing to some degree just the downsizing of these newsrooms, partly because of technology platforms, maybe not AI specifically, where I think we need to rethink the orientation of that question, or what I try to encourage our newsrooms to think about is how can AI scale the work of the limited news, the limited capacity you already have. Let's take it and make the most of it. And that can be, I hope, a sort of circulation of good feedback, a good feedback loop that can help you newsroom regrow if you've lost some of your work, or be able to grow into new markets despite the fact that you don't have a bigger staff. And it doesn't mean that you are necessarily not taking the time to engage with that community. It just allows you more time to be able to spend the time learning that community in the way that you need to be covering it properly.
And Liam, one big concern with AI in the news business is trust. Generative AI like ChatGPT are known for hallucinations, which I didn't know until now, basically making up facts. At the same time, mis and disinformation is rampant on social media. Do you worry that after helping newsrooms adopt AI tools, they may in fact lead to the generation of misinformation? Can we trust AI to be a part of our news ecosystem?
Great question, and something I work with our newsrooms on all the time. The short version is that hallucinations is just a nice marketing way of saying a lie. It's not telling you the truth, and maybe it doesn't know it's lying. The AI tool doesn't know it's lying, but that's what it's doing. And so journalists, again, are great researchers and skeptical, generally good skeptics. So I work very, very frequently with them, and they'll tell me, hey, this came back with the wrong answer. What do I do? Or say, I'm glad you found that it was the wrong answer. That's the first question. Is you always have to dig into what the AI model is telling you, and the fact that it's giving you, and fact check that. There are times when I've worked with newsrooms that have found, hey, this is so much work to fact check that this was actually not that didn't save me time. And I said, well, that's really good to know. That's an experiment that you ran, and you found that it is not the right tool for the job that you're trying to give it. So that's where I'm working with them right now. But I certainly think that we cannot take any facts or instances of any statements it's making at face value. You always have to dig one level deeper and make sure that what it's telling you is the truth. So it's a good starting point, but it can never be the ending point. I think it's a useful tool, but I would not put anything that's generated by these models directly onto a website or on air unless you really had a lot of correct in really good guardrails and also some disclosure about what's going on there.
Yeah, and Liam, one thing that we come back to a lot when discussing AI is it's inevitable. We're going to have to use it eventually. And right now it seems like AI is going to impact just about every single profession and industry out there. Some industries will adopt sooner than others, of course, but what will happen if news organizations don't get on board and adopt this new technology? How critical is this moment we're in right now?
I think it's really critical. I think journalism needs new models for engagement and for revenue. It already did. We all know that journalism was having trouble adapting to the web in the first place and social media after that. Every generation of technology, it seems like in the last few decades, has been a struggle for journalists to follow and understand. I think that one of the opportunities that I see with AI is to kind of meet the audience where they are a little more. AI is a good tool for summarizing, for changing a reading level of something if it's a little bit above or below maybe where a reader is, for visualizing data, for text-to-speech if somebody really is not great at reading but really wants to listen to something. There are ways for it to adapt and personalize news. You can take that too far. And I think in some ways, some social media platforms did and have taken that too far. But there has to be a happy medium, and we have to find it because there have to be new products that we find and test and build at a level that enables more sustainability for these organizations.
And Liam, in the last 30 seconds we have with you, I imagine your work as the technology lead at the American Journalism Project's Project and AI Studio requires a lot of looking ahead. What is your next focus on AI in local newsrooms through the American Journalism Project?
Well, one of the things we're doing is working closely with the fundraisers at these nonprofit newsrooms and helping them research and understand how AI can help them with sustainability, whether it's being smarter about how you're selling your journalism to a potential sponsor, or whether it's being smarter about donor communications and making the most of the limited time you have so that you can be out in the field working directly with those donors, and rather than doing all the drudgery work that sometimes comes with being a fundraiser. So that's something I'm really excited about working with our newsrooms on, along with so many of the big journalism sort of reporter-specific challenges that we have as well.
Liam Andrew is the technology lead at the American Journalism Project's Product and AI Studio, where he advises nonprofit newsrooms on adopting artificial intelligence into their work. Liam, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you so much. It was great to be here.
Coming up, we'll continue our conversation about AI and local news. Could artificial intelligence make journalism stronger, or will it be its downfall, or maybe somewhere in between? You tell us. The number is 313-577-1019. This is the Metro on WDET. Stay with us.
Metro on 101.9 WDET FM, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We're continuing our conversation about artificial intelligence in the news. That's because AI is making its way into nearly every profession, and that includes the vital public service work of journalism. Artificial intelligence is a powerful tool, and as much as it can aid us in our work, it carries with it a number of risks, like hallucinations or lies, data security concerns, job loss. The question is not if newsrooms will use AI, though. It really is how they will use it. Some newsrooms are embracing the technology. Some use it a little bit, and others not at all. Local news sources, regardless, are disappearing. all while AI is occupying every nook and cranny of our digital white-collar workday and asking us, can I make that easier for you?
Robin, how existential is that question? Is it adapt or die for local news in the face of AI? What ethical dilemmas are journalists facing with artificial intelligence now? To help us answer those questions, we're joined by Margaret Sullivan. She's the executive director for the Craig Newmark Center for Journalism Ethics and Security at Columbia University. She's also a former media columnist for the Washington Post, a former public editor for the New York Times, and an author. She writes a Substack newsletter about journalism and democracy titled American Crisis. Margaret Sullivan, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thanks so much for having me. This is a great subject to sink our teeth into.
I'm ready to sink our teeth into it. So we're going to talk about the benefits of artificial intelligence in news and the ethical risks it presents. Let's start with the opportunities.
So, as you said, and as your last guest has said, this is a very powerful tool. We're in the beginning stages of it. I mean, if you can zoom out a little bit, true, it's been around for a while, but in terms of newsrooms really using it, we're grappling with this. I've talked to a lot of the standards editors at big news organizations, and they say, wow, we're having trouble even keeping up with the change and coming up with rules and regulations around how we use it because it's just changing so quickly. So there's no question that there's tremendous opportunity here. And as you noted, there's a lot of risk as well. I just want to note, too, because your topic has a lot to do with local news, and thank you for the introduction. I also spent a couple of decades at my local newspaper on a Great Lake, a different Great Lake than Lake Michigan, Lake Erie. I was a reporter and then an editor and then the top editor at the Buffalo News before I went to the Times as public editor. So local news and what's happened to it is very much, it's a really important topic for me.
And Margaret, just kind of staying there a little bit, talking about local newsrooms in general, and just keeping up with the times. It's one thing that we've all talked about within the journalism, or within the industry of journalism as a whole, is not keeping up with the times. Whether it's podcasting, whether it's social media, no matter what it is, there are some things that the journalism world is not catching up to. Can you talk a little bit about how important it is for us to be in the forefront of AI, especially when we talk about local newsroom using AI?
Right. Well, we have to put this in the context of how poorly local newsrooms, and I think particularly local newspapers, responded, now 15 or 20 years ago to the onset of the Internet in their business. Newspapers in particular were kind of fat and happy. They were raking in this advertising money, and then all of a sudden it seemed like the Internet had come along, and we did not do a great job of adjusting. And in fact, it's been part of the reason that local news has been so decimated, is that we, really didn't get with the program too quickly. And we were, tied to the past and somehow had this idea that all the riches of the past were going to come roaring back. So now, we have another opportunity. My own feeling, and I've really been spending some time researching this, is that AI can be helpful to us. I'm not sure that it actually, saves our business model. It's hard for me to figure out how that would happen, but I think it can help us do a better job for the public. But as your last guest was so eloquent in saying, there has to be a human being or a number of human beings in the loop. We can't just take what AI comes up with and present it to the public. It has to be a tool, but not a substitute for journalism.
And Margaret, what problems do you see AI solving for local newsrooms, especially the smaller, understaffed newsrooms that we're seeing across the country?
I mean, I think that it can do some, for example, when newsrooms are trying to do data reporting and they're presented with, huge amounts of data that may have come from a government agency or, some other place, and there could be great stories there. AI is pretty good at sifting through data, taking our commands and telling us what the patterns are and what, the possibilities are for stories. That is a way to do enterprise or investigative reporting, a part of it. It's a way to do a part of the investigative or enterprise reporting that's so important to the public. Where I think I've seen news organizations falling down, and that some of them have been very dramatic in the mistakes they've made. For example, Sports Illustrated actually presented AI-driven material or AI-gathered material in the form of avatars that looked like real people, real reporters, real journalists with names and photographs and, stories underneath that. Well, these people didn't exist. So they were lying to the public. And it was a great embarrassment for Sports Illustrated, which is, a much different brand than it used to be anyway. So there's a lot that has to happen with transparency and with, caution, I think, here.
Just sticking there just a little bit, because just what you're just talking about a little bit, I want to focus on the ethical debates surrounding news and artificial intelligence. You just hit on it a little bit there, because how ethical is it to use those generated journalists, I guess you can say, and have them act as if they're real, So since journalists are...
It's absolutely an ethical violation.
Yeah.
And, I think if you went out in the street and asked a bunch of people, would they like their newsrooms to be using AI as if it, and presenting it as if it was actually coming from journalists, they would say absolutely not. So, it's funny because transparency on this is so important, and it kind of cuts both ways, because as we tell people, some of this material was done with the help of artificial intelligence, it kind of puts people's antenna up, and they may not like to hear that. So I think it's important to be transparent about how much we use it, and to be clear that it's not the final product. And it simply cannot be the final product, certainly not at this point, because there's just too many errors. There's too much room for error. And it's actually also just not, that's not what journalism is. I think if we think of it as a tool, but not an answer or a panacea, that's probably heading us in a better direction.
You're listening to The Metro on 101.9 WDET FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We're talking about journalism and artificial intelligence. Our guest is Margaret Sullivan. She's the executive director for the Craig Newmark Center for Journalism, Ethics, and Security at Columbia University. She also has a Substack I've been reading a lot. It's a newsletter called American Crisis. We also want to hear from you. Will artificial intelligence save local news, or could it be its downfall? The number is 313-577-1019. Now, Margaret, generative AI models like ChatGPT have to be trained. What happens when the information going into generative AI comes from a journalist reporting, or what if they paste a transcript off of an off-the-record conversation to summarize it? I'm wondering where that data goes. I've certainly been a little nervous about that myself.
Right. I mean, there are a lot of dangers here, and it's very much a case of, the information that AI produces is only as good as what it takes in. And so there are, for example, a lot of questions about the biases that can come out because the information that goes in may be biased. And so, that's where I think, human beings are pretty flawed creatures, as we know. But at this point, we're probably at least able to judge that. I mean, there's also a huge issue going on in newsrooms about whether to license our information to AI companies or not. The New York Times is in a big battle over this in court. And at the same time, the Times is, using AI more and more. But, and I just read about this today, but being very clear that while it's going to be used as a tool, it's never going to be used, at least at this point, isn't going to be used as a final product. So there are a lot of sort of ethical legal and other questions that are really, they're just happening now. They're bubbling up right now. This is a very, it's in the moment. And I just would like to add that, there are really good uses for AI. I can't remember the specifics, but within the past 2 years, there was a Pulitzer Prize winning piece of reporting that used AI significantly to work through data. But the news organization was very, very upfront with its readers about how it was used and so on. And I think if we do that, we're in better shape. There's an organization in California. It's a local news startup called Cal Matters, and they're doing a lot. They are doing a lot with AI, and they're very pro AI. Whether it's an election chatbot or whether it's, translation or whether it's data crunching. But even they, as upfront with it as they are, have been very careful about, checking it and keeping a human in the loop.
Margaret, it sounds like maybe it's time for us to revise our journalism code of ethics that so many of us have tacked up above our desks and that we refer to just in moments of despair, right. Reminding ourselves why we do this work that we do, and it is in the service of the public. Maybe that code needs to be rewritten with AI in mind so that everyone can be following some uniform rules and procedures.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that our practices need to change and our standards need to adjust. But I don't think that our basic beliefs and principles and motives need to change. I mean, we're still there, even though not everyone believes it, but journalists who are doing the job do believe it. We are there to serve the public. We are there to uncover information, to hold the powerful, whether it's government or business or whoever it may be, to hold them accountable. Those things are still the basics of our ethics, and to not harm other people, and to, basically function the way the founders saw us as an important part of democracy. I don't think that stuff has changed. Right. But how do we adjust when now there's this hugely powerful tool that's just kind of coming at us like a freight train? So I guess I do think that practices need to be spelled out, but I don't think that the basic ethics of journalism need to change or should change. Sure. And, I guess I should add, too, that I have a researcher at the Newmark Center at Columbia, and she and I have been working on a kind of a white paper about the changing rules of ethics the changing ethics and practices that newsrooms are dealing with around AI. And it's been really fascinating. It's also been really hard to do because it's changing so quickly. And where we started, a couple months ago is a far cry from where it is now. It's just, it's really a very fast moving.
We will be interested to see that sheet when it's completed and as it continues to evolve. It does make me wonder about another ethical dilemma that isn't so much about how journalists do their work as much as it is about AI's toll or its costs in other ways. And I'm thinking about on the planet, actually. Mm-hmm. AI requires massive amounts of energy to power its thinking. And so as the world starts to embrace AI, the energy demands are rapidly increasing. How much of an environmental risk does AI pose?
It does take tremendous amounts of energy to power AI. And that is a topic that, as we think about climate change, as we think about energy use, does need to be grappled with. But I don't think it has been very thoroughly grappled with yet. We know that it's true, but are there going to be a set of principles and rules around how much we'll use it to acknowledge that it's such a suck on energy and power? That's kind of a whole separate issue that does need to be dealt with, but I think it's kind of on the middle to back burner at best at this point.
Sure. And that would make sense given we know the heads of big tech companies seem to be cozying up with a lot of people in power right now, and that could potentially stay then on the back burner.
That's right, because a lot of what's happening among the tech, CEOs and powerful people is they really are pushing back. And the reason that they want to be close to power is they don't want regulation that would inhibit their growth and their profits. So, when you look at the big picture of what's happening in Washington and around the country, I think we have to know that this isn't just a money grab. It's also a power grab that has to do with regulation. And so, these issues are very intertwined with each other.
Margaret, we're going to dig into that a little bit more. We're speaking with Margaret Sullivan here on the Metro on WDET. She's the executive director for the Craig Newmark Center for Journalism, Ethics, and Security at Columbia University. Coming up, we'll talk about local and national news outlets and how they're facing a stress test and how they can survive while keeping you informed. We want to hear your thoughts. Give us a call, 313-577-1019. This is the Metro. Stay with us.
Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We've been discussing AI in local news, if it could help to revive it or bury it. And it's a high-stakes question. That's because local news outlets continue to vanish across the country, and the implications are huge. It means fewer watchdog reporters. That is, fewer people holding local leaders accountable, from folks on your city council to your school board. It means less accountability for law enforcement, who often try to operate with little transparency. It means less connection to our neighbors and less engagement overall with our community. Journalism is a shield for democracy. Research on local news illuminates this. In communities with a strong local news landscape, voter turnout is higher. Meanwhile, in places with less local campaign coverage, voters tend to say they're less likely to vote.
That's right, Robin. The crisis of local news feels more dire now in the face of an administration that's openly hostile to the press. The Trump administration has taken no shortage of unprecedented moves against this country's free press, and the effects on national outlets will be felt among local media too. To take stock of this moment, we've been speaking with Margaret Sullivan. She's the executive director for the Craig Newmark Center for Journalism, Ethics, and Security at Columbia University. She's also a former media columnist for the Washington Post, a former public editor for the New York Times, and an author. She also writes a Substack newsletter about journalism and democracy titled American Crises, and she also spent a few decades, actually, in a Buffalo newsroom as a local editor as well. So, Margaret, welcome back to the Metro, of course, and let's talk about the broader media landscape.
Right. So, you laid that out, you and your co-anchor laid that out so articulately about how important local news is. And I guess I would say that Detroit is relatively lucky. It too has felt the effects of the loss of local news, but unless I have it wrong, you still have two local newspapers. You have Detroit Public Radio. You probably have some local nonprofits that have started up. And so that makes you the kind of, the opposite of a news desert. But there are news deserts, places where there really isn't much local news, and all over the country. And this is they're spreading. It's happening more and more. Newspapers are going out of business. And the kind of ironic or paradoxical thing is that while these new nonprofit sites are terrific and they're important, they don't tend to crop up in places where, in places that are rural, in places that have less Wi-Fi. They're going to be in places that already have a relatively robust local news system. So it's a big problem. The thing that you laid out about how voting goes down, in places that are news deserts or that experience what could be called news poverty, is very true. The other thing that happens is people become more polarized. So the polarization that we see in the United States that's been so detrimental, I feel strongly that is in part the result of the loss of local news. So the more we can fight back against that in whatever way is possible, like supporting local news sources and subscribing to your local paper, even if you're unhappy with it, those things are really important.
And Margaret, you've written in your Substack newsletter that the press is largely failing to capture the severity of this moment. First, before we get to that, what is this moment that you're talking about?
Well, this moment is Trump 2.0,
okay.
the second administration of Donald Trump. In his first reign, I guess we could say, as president, he definitely was anti-press, and he depicted the media as the opposition party and as the enemy of the people, as he put it. But now we're seeing a much more severe situation in which, for example, his administration is keeping the Associated Press out of press briefings and off of Air Force One because they haven't immediately started calling the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, which is his preferred term. For example, other things that have happened is he has sued CBS over completely normal editing of an interview with Kamala Harris before the election, really taking an aggressive stance against the press. And it's really something to see. I've never experienced anything like it. And,
speaking of that, NPR's space in the Pentagon was recently revoked as well. So what makes this moment so unprecedented? What makes what we're seeing right now important to really talk about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it is really important to talk about it. And I'm so glad that you're devoting the time to it on your show. It's really important for people to stay tuned in right now. In my view, our democracy is really on the line. It's very fragile. And, we somehow seem to think, we've always had a country where the rule of law mattered and where the First Amendment mattered. But I think we're in new territory right now. So it is super important for people, even if they don't know exactly what to do about it, to stay informed. One of the things I hear from my friends and family is, I can't take all this rush of news. It's all so negative. I just want to tune out. And I feel it's really important not to do that, because if we all tune out, we're gonna lose our democracy.
We're gonna miss something, if we all decide, I can't handle this anymore. I'm turning it off. And yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So, Margaret, you've used the words righteous indignation to describe the tone you think the press should take. How do reporters and editors, producers, and everyone working in this industry right now do this without being alarmists?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think being alarmist is inappropriate right now. The thing that I see probably too much of is news organizations who have always done things in a particular way. For example, a news story will equally quote both sides of a situation. And at a time when, there was sort of a little bit more reasonable behavior, that might have made sense. But right now, it probably doesn't make any sense to, we call it both sidesing, to both sides every situation. News organizations and journalists make a lot of small decisions every day. What stories to do? What's the headline going to be? What photograph will go with that? Who are we going to quote? I hear people say, just give me the facts. But as we present those facts, there are many ways to do it. And if we sort of do everything in this very quiet way in which we act like this is all very normal, I don't think we're serving the truth. So I think that news leaders should be thinking about whether they are getting across the overall reality of this situation, or just kind of reporting each development as it comes along. I mean, don't forget, you've got Elon Musk running around infiltrating federal agencies, and the data that they've compiled on ordinary citizens. I mean, that is very far from normal, and he's not an elected official. So there's some really outrageous things happening, and I think that reporting it with a sense of that is appropriate.
You're listening to The Metro on WDET Detroit Public Radio. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Robin Vincent. We're speaking with Margaret Sullivan. She's the executive director for the Craig Newmark Center for Journalism, Ethics, and Security at Columbia University. And Margaret, I want to stay on the topic of Elon Musk and Trump as well, and AI. Trump and Elon Musk's path toward wanting to control that. Musk wanted to buy OpenAI, and the Trump administration, as we've mentioned, has been cozying up with the most powerful people controlling social media. Meanwhile, Meta owner Mark Zuckerberg is ending third-party fact-checking in favor of a community model mirroring what Musk is doing with X. How could this all affect the press?
Well, if you want to look at what Musk would do, if he got a hold of another organization, is all you have to do is look at what's happened to what was once called Twitter, and is now, really a whole different thing that's much, much more right wing, where there's a lot of stuff that would have been ruled out circulating there, a lot of misinformation, a lot of hate speech, a lot of Nazi stuff. So I think, his track record kind of speaks for itself in that way. But there don't seem to be too many ways to restrain this, because the president of the United States, with all of his power, has unleashed him. So it is I have to say that it is I've been in the business a long time, and it's really very shocking, and it's unfolding before our eyes. It's like, there's the Chinese curse that says, may you live in interesting times. And we are living in interesting times, and it is very disturbing in many ways.
We've been talking a lot so far in this segment about national politics, and that's something many legacy media outlets cover, like the newspapers you once wrote for, the New York Times and the Washington Post. But Margaret, what about local news outlets? I'm wondering, what role can local reporters and editors play for the public, for their neighbors, for communities at this time in the face of what you see as a constitutional crisis?
So I think that local news has a huge role to play, and I wish that they were back at full strength, but they're not. So we have to accept reality. But what local news organizations can do, whether it's a nonprofit site or a public radio or what remains of the once robust newsrooms in newspapers, is to tell the stories of how these changes at the federal level are impacting local people. So whether that's people losing their jobs, whether it's, the FAA losing staff at a time when we're seeing all these plane disasters, or whether it's what's happening in farmland, in forest land, there's a lot of local impact here, and we need the local news organizations to tell that story so that people can see see very clearly how local institutions and people are going to be affected and are being affected every day by these national policies. It's not just these, big figures who we see on CNN who are, making statements. It's actually things that are playing out in our families and our communities and in our lives. So we need local news to take that role very seriously. And it's true, we don't have the reporting power we once did, but we have to do what we can to tell the story.
Margaret Sullivan is the executive director for the Craig Newmark Center for Journalism, Ethics, and Security at Columbia University. Her Substack newsletter about journalism and democracy is called American Crisis. Margaret, thank you so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thanks for having me. This is a great conversation.
That is The Metro for Tuesday, February 18th. The Metro is produced by Sam Corey, Carey Jr. II, and Jack Philbrantz. Our engineer is Nate Bender. Our senior producer is David Lyons. And we cover a lot of topics on this show: culture, government, climate, technology, health. What stories matter to you most? Let us know by leaving us a voicemail.
Open the WDET mobile app and hit the open mic button as well, and tell us your name and what you want to hear from the Metro. This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation.